What's up out there, everybody? I hope you're all having a fantastic day today. Welcome to Movies Never Say Die. I'm Anthony DeJoya, and this is your one-stop shop for retro movie content. Today, we're continuing our adventures through the lost movies of the 1990s. This is episode 6, and I do think this collection of movies delivers a bit of it all genre-wise. There's plenty of comedy, some crime thrillers, a little suspense, and, of course, some nostalgic action. So let's take a blast to the past to talk about some movies that will last. This comedy centers around an uptight by-the-book FBI agent that must take a charming mobster into witness protection out in the suburbs in the hilarious My Blue Heaven from 1990, starring Steve Martin and Rick Moranis, from director Herbert Ross, written by Nora Ephron. Much like Goodfellas, released only a month after this movie, My Blue Heaven was also based on the life of Henry Hill, but obviously with a full-throttle comedic tone through Martin's portrayal of Vinnie Antonelli. Sure, My Blue Heaven follows the typical tropes of the odd couple, fish-out-of-the-water genre, but in the hands of Steve Martin and Rick Moranis, the result is comedic gold. I think Martin is riding at full speed in this exaggerated mafioso character type. He's just pumping out laughs from his dialogue delivery to his absurd accent and his just comical physical mannerisms. Martin knows exactly what this movie needed, and he knocks it out of the park with his performance, much like Rick Moranis does, who takes that typical straight character to Martin's over-the-top one and really does make the role his own. He is able to leave his comedic imprint on this movie. My Blue Heaven, to me, is like a silly, feel-good comedy, and I think it checks all the boxes, from effective jokes to comical scenarios, just enough action, just enough heart, and a fantastic chemistry between Martin and Moranis. And this movie is ridiculous in all the ways you would want one to be. This little action comedy is a favorite of mine. It stars Michael J. Fox as an action star researching for a role by following around a hot-tempered detective who just so happens to be on the trail of a serial killer in 1991's The Hard Way, directed by John Badham, also starring LL Cool J, Stephen Lang, and Annabella Sciorra. Now, to me, films like The Hard Way are examples of what popcorn movies used to be like before the days of superhero flicks and big over-the-top CGI-filled adventures that we get now. The Hard Way, to me, is like an old-school textbook Hollywood film carried by the charisma and chemistry of its two leading stars, a creative concept, an effective sense of humor, touches of heart here and there, and heavy doses of exciting action. This movie delivers all of it, and all of these years later, watching Fox follow the ultra-grumpy Woods around in this movie is entertaining. The supporting cast is solid. The main villain is filled with a lot of sadistic cartoonishness through the performance of Stephen Lang, and this movie just gels overall. I think the soundtrack is great, the practical stunt work is able to elevate the action set pieces, and while it may have its familiar character types and recycled plot beats, The Hard Way is an action comedy that delivers awesome action and hilarious comedy. I think Fox and Woods are so good together here. They're kind of an unlikely pair, but when they're playing off each other in this movie, the result is perfect, and The Hard Way goes out with a satisfying level of spectacle, making this movie a total cinematic package. Next up is another comedy. Most people remember Kid and Play from the House Party movies, but they also delivered another teen comedy about two students, one a delinquent and the other a valedictorian, who have their high school records swapped, resulting in waves of humor in 1992's Class Act, starring Christopher Reid and Christopher Martin, also known as Kid and Play, directed by Randall Miller. Much like Christopher Nolan's Inception was a dream inside of a dream, Class Act is a character swap swap movie inside of a character swap movie. Kid is play, play is kid. Both of their lives are conveniently and absurdly swapped in this admittedly silly comedy that, without question, does ride on the energy and the chemistry of its two leads. Class Act is just a kind of a dumb high school comedy that tries to navigate this ridiculous premise, and while doing so, it's a lighthearted movie that will have you cackling throughout if you can dial your serious button down for about 90 minutes. If you can do that, then you will have a blast with this silly movie as Kid and Play navigate their swapped lives in high school. Now, Class Act doesn't reel you in with a captivating premise. In fact, it essentially plays out like a long high school video with a series of vignettes cut into it, and it's just kind of a charming piece of cinema's past. Play is solid in this one. He doesn't really feel like the tough guy that he's trying to portray, yet he has his moments. Kid, however, is the driving force to me. From his antics, his mannerisms, and his delivery, he's just hilarious, and overall the cartoonish adventures in Class Act are as well. Now, I really do think this action movie has been forgotten. It centers on a DEA-employed bounty hunter and the brother of a thief who reluctantly team up together to look for a hoard of cash stolen from a drug dealer in 1994's Gunmen, starring Christopher Lambert, Mario Van Peebles, Dennis Leary, Sally Kirkland, and Patrick Stewart, directed by Darren Sarafi. Released in some countries in 94 and others in 93 and maybe a couple countries in 95, this movie kind of got a staggered release, and it's not a film without its flaws. The plot is a bit messy. It also relies heavily on almost every major trope in the action genre. However, I think if you enjoy B action movies and seeing older films with a familiar cast, then there is plenty of entertainment to be found in this just loud, brash action romp. I remember reading a review where someone compared Gunmen to being the good, the bad, and the ugly meets Romancing the Stone, and I would really agree with that. This movie goes from feeling like a cheesy spaghetti western to an 80s grindhouse action flick to an over-the-top adventure film, and while it may not always work, the odd pairing of Lambert and Peebles with Dennis Leary as the heavy, I think brings more than enough charm and energy and edginess to this movie. Sure, this one is just kind of going through the motions, but I think seeing this familiar cast in earlier roles such as Dennis Leary and Patrick Stewart and even Sally Kirkland is kind of cool, and somehow, despite being a cash hunt down in South America, the movie manages to stitch in some rap performances to kind of cement the film's high energy soundtrack. So if you like movies that kind of throw everything at the wall to see what sticks and tops it off with a bunch of macho humor, then Gunmen is a winner. For some reason, this was a movie I watched a lot when I was in high school. It follows a failing businessman who is hired by the army to teach underachieving recruits to help them pass basic training. It was one man's mission to teach a few the proud and the impossible in Renaissance Man from 1994, starring Danny DeVito, Gregory Hines, and directed by Penny Marshall. Roger Ebert likened this movie to a cross between Dead Poets Society and Private Benjamin, minus the spirit of both of those films, and to a point I would agree. Renaissance Man does feel overly manufactured, as do some of the character arcs feel a bit kind of artificial, and who knows how teaching Shakespeare to cadets is going to help them in the army, but I don't care. DeVito and Hines are a great pairing as they go from enemies to compadres. Now, my main issue with this movie really is just the length. At over 2 hours long, they could have easily shaved 30 minutes off of this thing, yet I still enjoy it for some reason. I remember watching this one a lot on cable as a teen. It's just a effective, feel-good comedy that doesn't require any thought at all. DeVito is able to land solid laughs, then seamlessly steps into the drama territory to kind of tug on the heartstrings a little to land that superficial sentimentality that many comedies from this time period enjoyed. I think Hines is great as well. He's just kind of just as perplexed as to DeVito's presence in this movie and on base as pretty much everybody watching. And I mean, seeing them maneuver these routine plot points is just kind of enjoyable and nostalgic. It's one of those ones where everybody learns about themselves to be better people at the end of the movie than when it started. And sometimes that surface level sweetness is all you want in a movie. This moody thriller from 1995 follows a brilliant lawyer who is called to the case of a young man about to be condemned to death for the death of a child. Buried deep in the Florida Everglades is a secret that can save an innocent man or let a killer kill again in Just Cause from 1995, starring Sean Connery, Lawrence Fishburne, and Blair Underwood. Now, to me, Just Cause is really a tale of two movies. Mid-90s Hollywood loved legal dramas, and for the first half, this movie delivers just that. It's also a touch of a character study as you learn more about the characters from Connery and Fishburne while also building your own case and your own evidence to whether Underwood's character is guilty or not. The settings down in the South, I think, gives the story a moody, foreboding backdrop, and the performances are excellent across the board. Connery is, of course, smooth and wise. He's kind of always classy despite the seediness lurking all around him. Then there's Fishburne, who's just sadistic as this cop. He's ultra grimy in this movie, and it's just perfect for what the role needed. So adding all this to an already compelling mystery and the ever charming Blair Underwood, the first half of Just Cause to me is surprisingly engulfing. Now, where some people may have issues is definitely going to be on the back end when admittedly Just Cause tries to do way too much. This is when unneeded twists and turns come in to convolute things. The shift in tone is noticeable. It's not a deal breaker, but it certainly is something that hinders the emotional intensity that the first half built. It also tries to close out with the traditional studio showdown gusto, but still I think this movie is great when you want something that's gripping but not overly impactful. Next up is a hilarious sports comedy. It's set in the world of boxing where the rules are simple. If you can't find the perfect contender, you create one. In 1996's The Great White Hype, directed by Reginald Hudlin, starring Samuel L. Jackson, Damon Wayans, Jeff Goldblum, Peter Berg, and many other familiar faces. I've always loved this movie. The Great White Hype is a satire on professional boxing, and at least during the time, and it still delivers a riot of laughs today. The cast is impressive. Everybody gets their moments to shine comedically, and Hudlin's direction is awesome as he captures kind of all the key elements of pro boxing and just exaggerates them to comical results. I think Wayans is hilarious as the champ who gets out of shape when he learns who his next opponent is. Samuel L. Jackson is just brilliantly wild as a cross between like a Don King and that old wrestling manager, the Grand Wizard. I think he, like Wayans, is just riding at full comedic speed in this movie. Everybody really knows what this movie wanted to be, and I think all the characters work. Even Peter Berg, whose bumbling dude bro persona is kind of perfect for this character that takes the boxing world by storm. So with a great cast of amusing cartoonish characters, a strong sense of humor in the writing, a great high energy soundtrack, and all the flamboyance of pro boxing, The Great White Hype is an amusement ride of silly humor that still holds up today. Next up is a cop thriller that has a seedy, sort of grimy tone to it. It centers on two corrupt cops who accidentally murder an undercover DEA agent. Whoops, and then they find their lives spiraling out of control as they attempt to cover it up. And Jim Koof's Gang Related from 1997, starring Jim Belushi, Tupac Shakur, and Layla Rakan. I've always loved gritty cop thrillers, and something about this movie always appealed to me. I wasn't able to put my finger on it as a teenager, but later in life I realized what I loved about Gang Related was its uniqueness. There are no good guys in this movie. The main characters are the villains, and that twist on this plot is really refreshing. Despite Belushi and Shakur being dirty, corrupt criminal cops, there's something about them you can kind of identify with, potentially that makes this downward spiral a little bit more intriguing, or potentially the identifying quality of this movie is it's a cautionary tale on a morality gone wrong. I don't know. Either way, the concepts of this movie work for me. It works for the film. Belushi and Shakur are both grounded. They deliver authentic, sincere performances. As the story evolves, their crimes kind of mount to cover their earlier crimes, and even seeing the differing ethical limits between them as partners is compelling to see play out. Now, my main issue with this movie is that it doesn't quite stick the landing. It kind of I feel like this is when the intensity from the filmmakers kind of draws back a bit, when the film leading up to the final act didn't. Yet all of these years later, you can still kind of easily sit back and find yourself consumed by the unnerving stress of this plot. This little dark comedy had a simple tagline: never trust a girl by her address, and that girl is teenage Vivian, living with her broke nomadic family on the outskirts of Beverly Hills during the late 70s so that they can attend the city's schools. In 1998's Slums of Beverly Hills, starring Natasha Lyonne, Alan Arkin, and Marissa Tomei, written and directed by Tamara Jenkins. This little indie movie made the festival rounds when it was released, and it did get some great reviews. I remember catching it on cable a couple years after it was released, and it really drew me in. I was living in Seattle at the time. I was a couple years away, maybe a year away from moving down to Southern California, and I just really connected to this main character's journey of trying to fit in new surroundings with people she didn't really know and wasn't used to. This movie really does deliver it all from that aspect. It's kind of heartwarming, it's humorous, it's grounded. It just kind of feels like a peek inside the lives of this dysfunctional family during the 70s just outside of Beverly Hills, which is a huge difference. I work up and through LA every month. I'm in and around Beverly Hills every month. You can go from one block being just an immaculate mansion to crossing the intersection to having just a dilapidated apartment building that hasn't been renovated since the 60s. So watching Vivian navigate this social and these class walls during the 70s is a thought-provoking and spirited ride. The production design is fantastic. This movie really does feel like a step back in time, and the performances are all perfect for the needs of their roles. I think Natasha Lyonne is fantastic. She's such an underrated performance here. She's able to hit all the emotional beats of her character and her coming of age, and Alan Arkin as her father is a home run. Slums of Beverly Hills doesn't hit you over the head with its melodrama, and I think that's what gives it a timeless appeal. Next up is a sci-fi thriller about a computer agent who is killed and his friend who gets wrapped up in it when he begins to suspect his newly launched virtual reality system could be involved. In 1999's The 13th Floor, directed by Joseph Rusnak, starring Craig Bierko, Gretchen Mol, and Vincent D'Onofrio. Now, this has always been an interesting movie to me. I didn't really understand it when I watched it as a teenager and found it to be a little bit too confusing, but I enjoyed a bulk of this film in certain sections from a visual aspect and from a storytelling aspect. There are a lot of great scenes and cool sequences in this futuristic thriller, and while the writing may not be able to fully connect them, and despite honestly sort of still finding this movie a bit convoluted, there's just something about it that I dig. I love the foreboding atmosphere and the hyper reality that this movie creates and kind of lives in. The visuals are awesome. The color spectrums really do pop from vibrant to cold and bleak, and the production design is top notch. I also like the performances in this movie. I feel that it's just one of those movies you can kind of pull something new from every time you watch it. So where the writing may have some issues in cohesiveness, I think you can't help but appreciate this film's creative ambition. The 13th Floor was a movie that took audiences to places they rarely had been to, and instead of just over-the-top spectacle, this movie kept it dark, kept it grounded, kept it unnerving. It really feels like a late 90s cyber thriller with the labs filled with colorful nightclub-like lights, and overall, I think this movie was just kind of ahead of its time. And that's it for today, guys. Episode 6 is in the books. Thank you so much for your patience. Like I said in the community tab, I had a bad wisdom tooth that I had been carrying around for decades that I needed to get pulled. It was really had me down and out. It was not feeling good at all, but I'm back to normal. Glad to get this video out. I thank you guys for your patience. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think of some of these movies down in the comments. If you've seen them, be on the lookout for episode 7 coming very soon. Thank you guys as always for your patronage and your viewership. I greatly appreciate it. I know there's so much time in the day, so anytime that you cut aside to stick it out on this channel and watch some of my videos is always greatly appreciated. I will see you guys all in my next video, and until then, movies never say die.
This is Jack Burton in the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Survive a war, you gotta become war.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
You
trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?